Haotoru Orki, a first-year high school student, possesses a unique and unconventional perspective on high school life. He firmly believes that it doesn't have to be filled with excitement and happiness. Instead, he prefers a more subdued and neutral approach, viewing things in shades of gray. Haotoru intends to live a minimalistic and uneventful existence, and he even has a masochistic streak within his personality. His negative outlook extends to various aspects of life, including studying, sports, and romance. He considers himself an energy-conserving individual and takes a rather lethargic approach to tasks. His motto is simple: if I don't have to do something, I won't do it, and if I have to do something, I'll do it quickly. Despite attending Kamiyama High School, which offers a diverse range of clubs, Haotoru opts not to join any of them. However, his well-laid plans are disrupted when his elder sister compels him to join the classic literature club to prevent its termination. In the club room, he encounters Chitanda Iru, a beautiful girl with captivating purple eyes. She warmly welcomes him and informs him that they share the same music class. Uninterested, Haotoru decides to leave, but Iru intervenes, informing him that she doesn't have the key to the club room. This confuses Haotoru, as he found the door locked when he entered, and wonders how Iru managed to enter the room without a key. Their conversation gets interrupted when Fucube Satoshi, Haotoru's middle school friend, arrives. After meeting Iru, Satoshi begins to weave a fanciful tale about the Chitanda family's prominence, claiming they are one of the 4 distinguished rising power families. He describes a hierarchy starting with the Jumonji family of Erikusu Shrine, followed by the bookstore owners, the Sarusubari family, the farm owners, the Chitanda family, and finally, the Mananbashi family that owns the mountainside. Iru expresses that she has never heard of such a hierarchy before, and Haotoru soon realizes that Satoshi has fabricated everything. Satoshi is well known for his knack for creating imaginative stories and takes pride in his title as a master of made-up stories. Haotoru continues to leave, but Iru stops him and demands him to deduce how she was able to enter the club room. As a result, Haotoru descends to find the janitor clutching the master key to the club room, hinting that he was the one who locked it. After a while, Iru gladly invites Haotoru and Satoshi to join the classic literature club. Satoshi agrees immediately, while Haotoru reluctantly accepts her plea. The next day, Haotoru fools Iru by convincing her of a fabricated mystery fabricated by Satoshi. On his way back to his house, he tells Satoshi why he deluded Iru. He states that he didn't want to waste his time investigating another mystery, so he opposed being lured into the faraway music room. The next day, Haotoru meets Iru in the club room. She discloses her plan to publish an anthology for the upcoming cultural festival. Believing it to be a tiresome activity, Haotoru initially refuses to assist her. However, Iru's persistent nature begins to bug him and he reluctantly agrees to help her with the anthology. They visit the library and encounter Ibara Mayaka, Satoshi's middle school friend. Iru then asks her if they keep any old anthologies in the library, but Mayaka replies negatively. Nevertheless, she suggests they might be able to find some in the archives, and everyone except Haotoru decides to wait for the librarian. Having an unbothered nature, he decides to leave, but Mayaka proposes to him to solve another mystery regarding a book that's always borrowed from the library. Haotoru notices the list of borrowers while Iru gets curious and urges him to solve the case. Consequently, he learns that 5 different people borrow this book each week for 5 weeks and then return it on the same day. After some brainstorming, he concludes that this book isn't being used for reading purposes. It's about history and is quite thick, so no one can read it in a single week. He asks the others how they would use it, and Mayaka claims she would use it as a pillow. Satoshi states he'd use it as an arm shield, whereas Iru suggests piling it up as a weight for pickling. Their ideas prove useless to Haotoru, who figures out that the book has been used as a signal by a group of girls. The front side says yes while the inverted side implies no. However, after watching the conditions of the returned books, his opinion changes. Suddenly, Iru smells a pungent smell from the book and Haotoru realizes the truth behind it. He then takes Iru and Mayaka to the art room. There, it is revealed that the book has been used as a reference by all the girls due to its vintage leather cover. Haotoru states that it's quite hard to carry this book all the way home. That's why the girls from the art class have been borrowing it. Iru and Mayaka get impressed as they begin staring at him out of shock. Afterwards, they return to the library, where the librarian returns and reveals there aren't any anthologies in the archives. Iru gets disappointed and the librarian tells everyone to look somewhere else. The next morning, Haotoru receives a phone call from Iru, who pleads to meet him in a cafe. Later on during their meeting, she begins to beat around the bush, which annoys Haotoru, and he decides to leave. Suddenly, Aru states that she's shy but musters up the courage to reveal that she wants to confess. Haotoru is speechless, wondering what Aru wants to confess. However, his doubts become clear when she asks for a favor. She reveals that she had an uncle named Sekitani-jun and wants Haotoru's help to remember what he told her. Furthermore, she explains that her uncle went to India 7 years ago but has never been the same since. She was very fond of him as a child, and he used to answer her every question regardless of how clumsy they were. In kindergarten, she learned that he was a member of the classic literature club, which piqued her curiosity. Therefore, she asked him a question related to the club, but he didn't answer it. However, she bugged him about it until he eventually answered the question. The answer made her cry, but much to her surprise, her uncle didn't comfort her at all. Later on, her family's relationship with the Sekitani family became worse, but she has forgotten the question that made her shed tears. Consequently, she requests Haotoru to help her remember the question, but he utterly refuses. As an energy-conserving person, he doesn't wish to take an ounce of responsibility, especially something as big as Aru's matter of life. Suddenly, she reveals that her uncle's been missing for over 7 years and will be declared deceased by the law soon. She wishes to know the answer before his funeral, and Haotoru agrees. Soon, the midterms begin and the access to the classic literature club becomes closed for a while. After the midterms are over, Haotoru receives a letter from his sister revealing the location of the old anthologies. They are located in the biology room, which is now used by the news club. However, President Taugado explains he didn't find any anthologies in the room but permits them to search. Aru talks about a thorough search, but Taugado becomes furious and orders them to leave. Later on, Haotoru realizes that Taugado has been smoking cigarettes, so he blackmails him to retrieve the anthologies. Aru becomes relieved as now she can solve the mystery of her uncle. However, much to her dismay, it is disclosed that the first edition of the anthologies is missing. The next day, Aru discloses the mystery of her uncle to Satoshi and Mayaka. Afterward, the investigation of the classic club's past becomes the top priority for all the members. In the evening, Haotoru, Satoshi, and Mayaka gather at Aru's mansion to discuss her uncle's mystery. The meeting begins and Aru explains the analysis that she gathered from the data. Moving on, she reveals that her uncle was expelled from Kamiyama High School, and his academic record ends with middle school. Consequently, she concludes that her uncle fought against something and left the school after the cultural festival. However, the other members reject her theory and move on to Satoshi. Satoshi only hypothesizes that on-campus violence was non-existent in the 60 seconds. Afterward, Mayaka begins reading her report claiming that there was a feud between the students and the teachers. The students' leader was Sekitani-jun and the teachers didn't know how to react. Violence got involved and the teachers expelled Aru's uncle. However, Haotoru calls her theory to be highly abstract and rejects it. Satoshi then discloses another report published by the news club of Sekitani's time. He assumes no violence was involved but fails to come to any other conclusion. Finally, Haotoru's turn arrives, but he doesn't have a theory. He becomes anxious and asks Aru to use the bathroom. There, he puts together his theory by using the perspectives of other members. Later on, he returns and begins to explain his theory, starting with the time when the incident took place. He concludes that the reason for Jun's expulsion was the cultural festival. The student body most likely negotiated with the principal to not shorten the days of the cultural festival. However, under the heroic leadership of the Classic Literature Club president, Sekitani-jun, they became successful. Still, the principal was furious and expelled Jun after the cultural festival ended. The mystery again gets solved and all the members of the club leave, but Aru still wonders why she cried at her uncle's answer. Satoshi wonders why Haotoru, despite being an energy-conserving guy, is helping Aru. Haotoru then claims that he's tired of being a gray person and can't stand Aru wasting so much of her energy on multiple things. That's why he has begun to solve mysteries to waste some energy, but he's still not sure if wants a colored life or not. Later on, Haotoru receives a phone call from his sister and discusses the case of Aru's uncle with her. Afterward, he realizes that his theory is either incorrect or incomplete and decides to dive in further. He believes Jun must have had some regrets as he sacrificed himself for his fellow students and vows that he'll find the truth. Later on, everyone gathers for an emergency meeting in the club room. As Haotoru arrives, he reveals he has some holes to fill regarding yesterday's theory. Furthermore, it is revealed that the writer who wrote the preface about Jun's life, Koriyama Hyouka, was a first-year student 45 years ago. Much to everyone's surprise, Haotoru figures out that the writer is none other than the librarian Idoigawa, whose middle name is Koriyama. Consequently, they decide to ask the librarian the truth behind the expulsion of Iru's uncle. Later, they encounter her and Haotoru shows her the preface she wrote during her school days. She instantly realizes that the literature club members are interested in Sekitani's movement. Haotoru then shows her his theory, which amazes her, and she claims almost all of it is true. Nevertheless, he asks her if Jun sacrificed himself of his own will or not, which astonishes her. Idoigawa then reveals the cultural festival was the culmination of the energy that ran throughout Japan. However, the year she enrolled, the student movements grew quite intense and the principal stepped on a landmine. He decided to reduce the days of the cultural festival from 5 to 2, which triggered the students for the protests. The movement was started by an anonymous student, but the one given the shortest straw was Jun. In the end, plans to shorten the festival were crushed but swept by passion. The students went too far with the movement. They boycotted class, held bonfires, and started a fire in the martial arts center. The building was destroyed, but the admin decided to refrain from involving the police. Consequently, they decided to expel a student as a representative who was none other than Jun himself. Unfortunately, the student body did nothing, and yet Jun was calm until the end. After a few years, the cultural festival was still shortened to 3 days. Iru then asks Idoigawa why her uncle named the classic club's anthology Hyouka. She reveals that she doesn't know what he meant, but Haotoru becomes annoyed as he has figured it out. He claims Hyouka is a lame pun, and Jun made sure his feelings would be passed down to the descendants of the classics club. It translates to ice cream in English, and ice cream was the message he wanted to deliver. He wanted to tell the future kids to have an opinion and fight for their rights. Iru begins crying as she finally remembers the question she had asked her uncle. She asked him what Hyouka meant, and he advised her to be stronger. With tears in her eyes, she expresses her gratitude to Haotoru for solving the mystery. The following day, the Classic Literature Club members begin planning content for their anthology. On a random day, Haotoru is getting bored in his class, but suddenly, it gets interrupted by a commotion happening in Iru's class. Later in the club room, Mayaka gets furious at Satoshi and scolds him for standing her up on a date. Meanwhile, Haotoru becomes annoyed by her continuous recrimination and advises her to take a breath. Afterward, the four of them get into a discussion expressing what it means to become furious. Satoshi claims he rarely gets angry, but Haotoru thinks the opposite. He believes Satoshi just doesn't make a big show of venting his feelings to everyone. On the other hand, Mayaka calls Haotoru a hollow person who's just too empty to even get mad. Then, Satoshi talks about how Iru is calm and composed, having a high rate of tolerance. He and Mayaka begin complimenting Iru's traits, but she gets mad at them. Iru then ends the topic after concluding that getting angry isn't a bad thing. Being in a flow, she then begins a topic about the 7 deadly sins, calling pride and greed as important things. According to her, having no pride means zero self-confidence, and similarly having no greed makes it hard to support a family. Furthermore, she expresses that if the people aren't envious of each other, no new technologies can be developed. The other 3 members get intrigued by her opinion, and Haotoru begins imagining her as a kindred spirit. Suddenly, Iru admits that she does get angry, especially when food gets wasted. Curious about the earlier commotion, Haotoru asks her to tell him why she got furious. Much to his dismay, she claims she's unaware of what incurred her anger and urges Haotoru to fulfill her curiosity. She then explains her maths teacher arrived in the class and ordered a student to solve an equation that hadn't been taught in the class. The teacher then started berating the students instead of admitting his mistake. She couldn't stand the injustice and got mad at the teacher, telling him to check his schedule. Consequently, the teacher understood he was wrong and apologized for his mistake. Iru, however, states that she wonders how her teacher was able to make such a rookie mistake and asks Haotoru about it. As always, he initially refuses, but her annoyance makes him accept her request. Using his brilliant deduction, Haotoru figures out that the maths teacher simply mixed the schedule of 2 different classes. Again, the mystery gets solved, but Iru and Haotoru both fail to conclude why she got angry. During summer vacation, all 4 members of the Classic Literature Club take a trip to a hot spring arranged by Iru. They arrive at the Susanso Inn of Mayaka's relatives and meet her cousins Ri and Ko. Later during dinner, Haotoru gets impressed by the cheesecake made by the sisters Ri and Ko. However, one of them accidentally spills some food, but Iru helps her clean and tells her to cheer up. Afterwards, Haotoru returns to his room and spends his time watching some TV. Suddenly, he realizes that he has arrived at a hot spring and heads out to enjoy himself. On his way, he encounters Aru, who asks him how it feels like to have a sister. Aru then admits that seeing the Zena sisters, she has realized the fact that she always wanted to have siblings. They arrive at the hot springs and split. Afterwards, Haotoru jumps into the warm water and meets Satoshi, already having the time of his life. Unfortunately, he becomes dizzy and falls unconscious, but Satoshi takes him back to the inn. Later on, the Zena sisters begin telling ghost stories to Satoshi, Yu, and Mayaka. The next day, a sleepless Mayaka explains that she saw a silhouette of a hanging man in her room across the way. As always, Aru gets curious and admits she also saw the same silhouette last night. Both she and Mayaka then force Haotoru to solve this mystery. He then begins examining the window from where the girls saw the ghost and decides to see the main building. However, Kao refuses and states Ri will get mad at her, so she can't take them there. The next day, Haotoru and Aru go out to examine the inn from the outside, but Kao intervenes. Later during lunch, Ri shows up dressed up in a yukata and Haotoru solves the mystery. In the evening, he reveals to Aru the ghost she saw was nothing but a yukata on a hanger. Furthermore, he discloses that Kao was envious of Ri and wanted to try on her yukata. However, Ri wouldn't lend it to her, so she secretly wore it to the festival last night but got wet. It was late, so she snuck into the most distant room in the main building and hung the yukata up to dry. Bad luck befell her because the moonlight made it look like a ghost, but she put it back in time. Haotoru tells Aru to keep it confidential, and Aru gets shocked at how Ri is possessive of her things. Just then, she witnesses Ri giving a piggyback ride to an injured Kao, which makes her feel cherished. While chatting with an acquaintance from the upper class, Aru receives an offer to see the screening of a movie with her other club members. The next day, she discloses that Class 2 Fahrenheit is making a mystery movie and has invited all the literature club members to get their opinion. Later on, they go for the preview screening and meet Aru's senior Arisu Fayumi. Satoshi gets shocked as he holds her in high regard and praises her. Irish, however, claims she doesn't know him and shows everyone the CD of the movie to hear their honest opinions. The screening begins and Haotoru wonders why she wants them to watch it. Arisu tells them to watch it as she'll ask them some questions at the end. The movie begins with several volunteers from Class 2 Fahrenheit exhibiting the history of Narakubo from the Kanya Festival. Soon, they reach Narakubo and find an old mansion to stay the night. Inside, they find a floor map and some keys to the other rooms. Then, they split up to find a room where they can stay. Later on, everyone except their leader converges at the meeting point. Worried about him, they proceed forward and stumble upon a locked door. As they use the master key to open it, they encounter him lying dead, drenched in blood. Seeing him murdered, all the volunteers get scared, but the movie ends. On the other hand, Arisu asks the literature club members what they think about the movie and is met with a positive response. Just then, she reveals that the movie is yet incomplete as the script writer Hongumeyu fell ill before finishing it. Arisu then asks them who the culprit for the murder would be, and Haotoru replies Yamanishi. Impressed by his keen sense of mystery, she ends the screening and prepares to depart. However, Aru's curiosity again gets piqued and she begs Haotoru to solve the mystery. He initially refuses to take such responsibility, but eventually agrees. Arisu tells him to listen to her class's amateur detectives and offer his opinion. Later on, Satoshi reveals Iris's family runs a general hospital and her nickname around the school is the Empress. The four of them then start giving each other supposed nicknames and the day ends. The following day, a 2 Fahrenheit student Eba Kurako leads them to the amateur detectives. They meet the members behind the production of the film, beginning with Nakaju Junya, the assistant director, Haba Tomohiro, the props master, and finally Sawakaguchi Misaki, the publicity manager. The club members then sit down to listen to the ending theories of the 3 amateur detectives one by one. Nakaju is the first one to present his conclusion, which is quite simple. He believes drama is important in Kaido. The murdered guy died in a room with no exits. Furthermore, he states that the culprit fled through a window after performing the murder. Haotoru, however, rejects his theory as he thinks the murderer wouldn't take a risk to flee in broad daylight. Next comes Haba, who states that the murder wasn't a planned action. Rather, the culprit found that every block just happened to fall in place and committed the crime. He also believes the murder took place in a locked room and all the possible escape routes were blocked. Moreover, there were no traces of anyone using the window, so Haba states the victim himself created the locked room situation. He then pulls out a rope and claims Kunasu is the killer. She's a rock climbing specialist, and lowering the rope from the 2nd floor window killed Kaido in the stage left area and escaped by the same route. Later on, Haotoru rejects Haba's theory as well because it's not consistent with the story. The building is old and Kaido wouldn't have stood waiting for someone to kill him. He then receives the original script from Kurako and begins waiting for the last detective. Misaki arrives and presents a theory similar to Friday the 13th. She believes another mystery killer was involved and killed Kaido. Afterward, Haotoru rejects her theory as well because he believes it's too cliché. In the aftermath, all the theories get dismissed and Iris personally invites Haotoru for a cup of tea. He begins to feel some tension in the air and Iris asks him to state the flaws in each theory. She learns that he's the main person who rebuffed everyone's theories. Much to his surprise, Irisu then reveals he is the only person who's competent enough as a detective for the movie. Satisfied with his talents, she somehow convinces him to find the true answer behind the mystery. Out of humbleness, Haotoru claims he's not talented or special. He's just lucky. However, Irisu tells him a story about talent which makes him realize that he's a prodigy. Later on, he voluntarily begins going to school on a holiday which shocks his friends. During a walk to the school with Satoshi, he admits that now he desperately wants to find out who killed Kaido. Seeing the abrupt change in his personality and self-esteem, Satoshi reveals he's a bit jealous. Later in the club room, they meet Mayaka and the three of them take another look at the movie. Mayaka and Satoshi notice that the camera work is quite horrible. However, Haotoru thinks they should focus on the real thing. Just then, Satoshi's friend Yamachi arrives and forces him to take the makeup maths tests. Mayaka also decides to depart and hands a book to Haotoru. He then begins deeply analyzing the movie footage again and again. After some time, he finally figures out the mystery and calls Irisu to inform her. Haotoru then claims that the key to this puzzle is the locked room. No one could have entered the room where Kaido died, nor could they have left it. Moreover, the only window leading outside was unusable, meaning the sole remaining possibility is that the culprit used the door. However, from the video, it's quite difficult to notice if there's some physical trick regarding the door. Consequently, the most probable assumption is that the culprit used the master key to get in. Since Sujimura would have seen everything in the lobby, the right-hand corridor was the only way to get to the room. None of the 6 members would have been able to enter the office, get the key, and then get to the right-hand corridor unseen. This implies that none of these 6 was the culprit, leaving a possibility of a 7th person who was also there. Irisu gets quite fascinated and claims his theory is a bit similar to Sawakaguchi's. Haotoru admits it and says Hongu was looking for a 7th actor according to Sawakaguchi. He then pinpoints certain detailed things in the video, starting with the floor map that gets illuminated with a flashlight. Everyone is looking for Kaido and someone uses a flashlight, but none of the members had it. Then, the part where they enter the murder scene clearly shows there was time for the holder to hide the flashlight. He then talks from a viewer's perspective that the movie is boring, the acting is bad, and the camera work is amateur. However, there's a reason behind it. In the movie, the cameraman was filming from the same perspective as the other characters. Irisu figures out the cameraman is the culprit behind the murder, and Haotoru explains the most important point. When all the other characters went to find their respective rooms, the camera was still filming until no one was left in the lobby. Then, the scene faded to black and he took the master key from the office. Afterward, he killed Kaido, locked the door, and ultimately returned to the lobby. He concludes there's no reason to have anyone narrate their deductions since the culprit is obvious. Irisu gets satisfied and congratulates him for solving the mystery. She then asks Haotoru to name a title for the movie and he replies with what no one noticed. After airing the movie, everyone except Haba becomes pleased with the conclusion. Mayaka then tells Haotoru he missed mentioning a rope throughout the whole movie that the original scriptwriter had asked to provide, leaving him in shock. The next day, Satoshi musters up the courage to tell Haotoru that his conclusion doesn't match what Hongu would have wanted. He claims there was a major inconsistency and Hongu only reads Sherlock. Consequently, she wouldn't have used narrative tricks like the one Haotoru utilized. Later on, he meets Iru, who reluctantly tells him what's wrong with the movie. However, she's not particularly interested in how the movie ends, rather she's curious about Hongu herself. Iru states that Hongu knew the ending she wanted from the start. Even if she fell ill, someone could have asked her, but she didn't want to get criticism, that's why she didn't tell anyone. Haotoru realizes he took a narrow approach without considering Humongous' feelings. He took the role of a detective instead of a scriptwriter and was completely wrong. After returning home, the thoughts of failure begin bothering him and he decides to read a book to ease himself. The next day in school, he's sitting with a gloomy face and meets Irisu, who reveals the movie turned out to be wonderful. She thanks him and invites him for a celebration on the weekend, but he coldly refuses. Angered by the failure, he decides to have a private conversation with her. Afterward, he claims that Honggu had no interest in the tricks and preferred happy endings. Conversely, she was averse to bad endings, especially the ones where characters die. Haotoru then explains not a single word in the script says Kaido died, unlike the movie. He concludes that Honggu saw that the movie was wrong, but she couldn't bring herself to tell her classmates to refilm it as she wasn't the confrontational type. However, Irisu stepped in and told her to feign illness, leaving the script unfinished. In the end, Haotoru gets annoyed by the fact that Irisu used him and got what she wanted without hurting Honggu. The following morning, Iru motivates Haotoru to solve the mystery from Honggu's perspective. He then explains if Kaido hadn't died, the culprit would be Kunasu, and she would have done it through the window. She would use the rope from one of the empty rooms to get down on the floor. Then, she would have attacked Kaido, but it wouldn't have been a fatal one, and she'd use the same rope to meet with everyone else acting as if nothing happened. Furthermore, he reveals that the seventh actor was the narrator and Kaido locked the room himself. They would never know why Kunasu attacked Kaido as Honggu didn't reveal it. Ultimately, Iru becomes satisfied as he also dislikes stories where characters die. The most awaited day of the Kanya festival finally arrives and everyone is unable to sleep due to excitement. Haotoru's sister, however, tells him it's a tradition in the classic literature club to never have a festival without facing a problem. She then hands him a broken fountain pen as good luck and Haotoru leaves. Later, Haotoru notices the atmosphere of the school has become quite lively and enjoyable thanks to the Kanya festival. He meets Mayaka, who reveals she accidentally made 200 copies of their anthology instead of 30. Iru prompts Haotoru to find a solution for this problem as well, and Mayaka apologizes for her mistake. Afterward, he suggests advertising the club and finding a better place to sell the copies. Consequently, he orders Iru to convince the student council to move their club location to a better stall, and Satoshi to focus on advertising. Later on, Iru meets the student council president Tanabe and requests a better location. Tanabe says he instantly can't do that and advises her to put some anthologies in the booths of other clubs. Later on, Mayaka successfully manages to sell a few copies through the manga club. Meanwhile, Haotoru is sitting hopelessly in the club room, but a punk comes and buys a copy from him. The scene then shifts to Iru, who begins taking part in different activities under her club's name. 7. Would they be able to break the classic club's tradition of facing bad luck during the festival? Find out in the next episode, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel.